Hello and welcome to Vantage this week, where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. Tensions are soaring over West Asia. On Sunday, Iran struck Israel. It rained about 300 missiles and drones on Israel. It was a tit-for-tat response, so Israel was ready for it. And after week-long speculation, Israel responded. Benjamin Netanyahu launched airstrikes on Iran. We'll bring you the full story. Also look at the worst-case scenario. What would a full-blown war between Iran and Israel look like? How do they compare militarily? Whose force is superior? We'll discuss all of that and also tell you how West Asia is on the edge. Remember, this is one of the most militarized regions in the world, not just because of the regional players, but also global powers. Which countries have military assets in West Asia and how many? All of this and more lined up. Let's get started.
A number of Iranian missiles fell inside Israeli territory, causing minor damage.
It's one of the worst feelings ever, knowing something will happen, but not knowing when. Israelis experienced that feeling for most of last week. The Iranian military was poised to strike them, but no one knew when. Well, late last night it happened. Hundreds of projectiles were fired towards Israel. We're talking about a cocktail of weapons. Israel counted more than 300 of them. 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 110 ballistic missiles. They were fired from different locations, from Iran, from Syria, from Iraq, and from Yemen. But Israel was ready for it. You see, this was a widely expected attack, a tit-for-tat response. Last week, Israel had struck Iran's embassy in Syria. They ended up killing top Iranian commanders, so Iran was always going to respond, which is why Israel and its allies were ready. They say around 99% of the projectiles were shot down, some over the Iraqi and Syrian airspace, the rest over Israel. It filled the night sky with explosions. Take a look. Now, 300 is a big number, but these drones and missiles caused very little damage. Around 12 people were injured and one girl was killed. Plus, a military base in southern Israel was slightly damaged. I guess the obvious question is how? It was a joint effort by Israel's allies, especially the US and the UK. Both countries had moved important assets to the region, the US and the UK. So when Iran attacked, they were ready. Fighter jets took off from undisclosed bases in the region. They shot down most of the drones before they reached the target. Even Jordan took down a few projectiles. Of course, some did make it to Israel, but those were shot down by the air defense system. And there are many layers to it. But this time, two of them were key. The Arrow system, which shoots down long-range missiles, and the Iron Dome, which shoots down short-range rockets. Both use the same concept: track a projectile, fire ammunition at it, and blow it up in the sky. It's costly, but clearly effective. But good defense was not the only reason for the limited damage. Iran's attack was half-hearted. They wanted to create a spectacle. They wanted to appease their domestic audience. But damage perhaps was not their goal. Iran's foreign minister has admitted this. He says Tehran had informed the US about the nature of its attacks.
We announced to the White House in a message this morning that our operations will be limited and minimal, with the aim of legitimate defense and punishment of the Israeli regime.
Which brings us to the reactions. The world is understandably worried because, damage or not, this attack is unprecedented. In the past, Iran has used proxies to strike Israel, like Hezbollah and Hamas. They have never used their own military. This is the first direct Iranian attack on Israel, which makes it very significant. That was also in fact reflected in the ground reactions. Iranians were over the moon. They took out bike rallies and marches in Tehran, and they called it a proud and happy moment.
We hope this attack continues to the point that Israel is destroyed.
We will never allow anyone to violate Iranian territory. Any enemy contemplating aggression against Iran will meet the same fate as Israel.
So celebrations in Iran. Over in Israel, things were more subdued. Some said they were used to the rocket and missile barrage. Others were more wary.
Actually, all heard about the attack of Iran, but we're not afraid because we went to celebrate birthday of one of our friends, and we already got used to being attacked for the last 6 months.
The situation is really frightening because we're afraid of what happens and all of bombing and aircraft that are coming.
So what next? Iran says the operation is over and they clearly mean it. If they wanted escalation, this attack would have looked very different. Plus, life is slowly returning to normal. Last night, most countries in the region had shut their airspace, but now they're back up and running. Even Israel has reopened its airspace. Having said that, the danger has not passed. Far from it. A lot depends on Benjamin Netanyahu. His war cabinet has been asked to decide on a response. The question is, what will they choose? More escalation or a truce? Israel's own allies do not want an escalation. They have condemned Iran's missile attack, but they may not support retaliation. Look at the reaction so far. Joe Biden had a phone call with Netanyahu. He called Iran's attack brazen. He also promised ironclad support for Israel. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak released a similar statement. He called Iran's attack reckless. He also accused Tehran of sowing chaos in the region. So did German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He said the attack was unjustifiable and irresponsible. So the West is firmly behind Israel. Maybe not on escalating the conflict, but definitely on condemning Iran. We told you about the US bases. Now let's talk about the countries hosting them, the Arab nations of West Asia. When Iran launched its attack, one thing struck most observers. Jordan shot down the Iranian drones and missiles. Jordan, a Muslim Arab nation, took up arms to defend Israel. A country with a queen of Palestinian heritage defended Israel. Can you imagine the domestic headache this causes? It's why Jordan is pretending it did not help very much.
Yesterday, we dealt with some flying objects that entered our airspace and were confronted to prevent them from endangering the safety of our citizens and populated residential areas. The debris fell in multiple areas during that time without causing any damage or injuries among citizens.
Jordan is doing its best to show that it was just protecting itself, not Israel. We'll soon see if their people buy this explanation, but Jordan is not the only Arab state that helped Israel. It's the only one that did it so publicly. A lot of others helped in secret. Reports say that Saudi Arabia and the UAE were also involved. They shared intelligence about the Iranian attack. And that's not all. Arab nations also opened their airspace, allowing Israel's British and American allies to defend it. The Arabs host Western air defense systems, surveillance and refueling aircraft as well. All of this would have been used in the defense of Israel. So most Arab nations did help protect Israel from Iran. But we should mention something else here. This was not some betrayal of the Iranians or the greater Muslim cause for that matter. It's nothing like that. Iran wanted the Arab countries to pass along this information to the US. Tehran likely wanted the attack to fail. As we mentioned yesterday, the attack was to save face, to put up a good show for the domestic audience. Iran doesn't want an all-out war with Israel. If it did, it would have attacked long ago. Iran had to react to the destruction of its embassy in Syria. They also had to make sure that they did not actually hurt Israel too much. And how do you ensure that? Telegraph your attack via Arab-backed channels. The plan seems to have worked. Iran can say it attacked. Israel did not really suffer any serious damage. The US can say they protected their ally, and the Arab countries, minus Jordan, can pretend that they're not involved. Everyone wins. Well, except the Iranian, Israeli, and American taxpayers. They paid for the fireworks show after all. But then taxpayers always lose. Everyone else walks away with a victory. But how did it come to this? How are the Arab nations suddenly helping the Israelis, who until a few years ago were the ultimate enemy? It boils down to self-interest. Most of the Arab states are rich. Take Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for example. They make billions through oil. They already have giant buildings and sports cars on every other street. These countries want to spend their wealth on development or prepare for an oil-free future, like Saudi Arabia, which is building futuristic cities and buying entire sports. These rich Arab states do not want to be slowed down, especially because of a war between two of their former enemies. If a war breaks out, everything goes up in smoke. Arab airspace will be compromised regularly. Misfired weapons will damage their infrastructure. Their air bases will constantly be used by the US, making them targets. It will be almost impossible for the Arab nations to avoid getting sucked into this conflict, so they would rather just avoid the war altogether and focus on improving their nations. They've been trying to do this for years now. Take the UAE and Bahrain. These two countries recognized Israel back in 2020 after the US-led Abraham Accords. It took years of diplomacy to bring this about, to de-escalate the situation between Israel and the Arab nations. Saudi Arabia was widely expected to follow suit, but hopes for that were dashed last October with the Hamas attack and the following Israel-Hamas war. Now, an Israel-Iran war will be much worse. It will derail all the plans the rich Arab nations have laid out, which is why these countries will try and prevent a war at any cost. Israel has hit back. No more speculation, no more dissecting options. Benjamin Netanyahu has launched airstrikes on Iran. The news trickled in this morning. Reports of explosions in the skies above Iran, a bit like what Israel reported last week. But this strike appears more limited. It targeted a city in central Iran, a city called Isfahan. It's around 400 kilometers south of the capital. Videos on social media showed explosions in the sky, which usually means one thing: projectiles being shot down by the air defense. But the specifics are not clear. In public, Israel has not even confirmed this attack, but US officials did confirm it. Apparently, they were informed in advance. Israel is said to have shot missiles and drones at Iran. Did any of them hit? Again, the US says they did, but Iran is downplaying the whole thing. Their state media claims small drones were fired at them, most of which were shot down.
You're seeing Isfahan, which is in complete peace. People are living their normal lives. I think 2 or 3 hours earlier at midnight, sounds were heard in Isfahan sky. Based on the information we acquired, several small drones were flying in the sky over Isfahan, which were fired at.
So Iran says no biggie. But they did take precautions. This morning, major airports in the country were closed. Most flights in the region were also diverted. But later, those restrictions were lifted. Iran now says its airspace is open. So the assumption is the strike was limited, more symbolic than deadly. But why Isfahan? It's a strategically important city. You have an airbase with fighter jets, a missile production complex, and key nuclear facilities. In fact, Isfahan is very close to Iran's Natanz nuclear site, just about 100 kilometers. But Israel did not target it. Even the United Nations atomic watchdog has confirmed this. They said the nuclear sites are fine. So what was Israel hoping to achieve? Well, this operation had two main goals. One was to establish deterrence. Iran had launched missiles and drones at Israel, so Israel wanted to say, you can't do that. If you do, we will hit back. That's the logic of deterrence. The second goal was to display Israel's capability. Isfahan is deep inside Iran. It's not some remote border town. So by targeting this city, Israel is sending a message that nowhere in Iran is safe. Which brings us to the reactions. How are Iranians reacting to the strike? Many of them have shaken it off. Some don't even believe that the strike happened.
They couldn't handle Gaza, that is close to its borders. Attacking Isfahan, that is ridiculous.
If Israel makes the slightest mistake, the reaction from Iran would be more severe in a way that silences Israel and its master, the US, forever.
What about Israel? This morning, sirens ran across northern Israel. It turned out to be a false alarm, but the danger has not passed. Along with Iran, Israel also struck other targets. Explosions were reported in Syria and Iraq. Both countries host Iranian proxy groups. Plus, the Hezbollah in Lebanon has stepped up attacks. So the next few hours will be crucial. Israel will be keenly watching for a possible response. As for the people, their reaction has been mixed. Some say the attack was necessary. Others fear what could happen next.
I think the attack in Iran is a necessary action in our environment, which is much harsher than the jungle in Africa. Animals over there behave much nicer than human in this area.
I'm very sad that Israel attacked Iran, and I'm afraid what will happen now, what will be in Israel.
Now to the million-dollar question, what happens next? Will there be more escalation between the two sides? Well, it seems unlikely at the moment, and there are three reasons why. Number one, Israel's behavior. There's no chest thumping, no grand statements in the media. Israel has not even admitted to the strikes. Usually that means one thing. Netanyahu considers the matter closed. Reason number two, Iran's reaction to the whole thing. Their state media is downplaying the strikes. Most reports don't even mention Israel. If they wanted escalation, we would have seen the opposite. More Israel blaming, more rallying of public opinion. And finally, reason number three, global pressure. US officials say they did not approve Israel's airstrike. Most of the world says it's time to de-escalate.
The United States has not been involved in any offensive operations. What we're focused on, what the G7 is focused on, and again, it's reflected in our statement and in our conversation, is our work to de-escalate tensions, to de-escalate from any potential conflict.
Significant escalation is not in anyone's interest. What we want to see is calm heads prevail across the region.
It is absolutely necessary that the region stays stable and that all sides refrain from further action.
China opposes any actions that lead to tension and further escalation of the situation.
Maybe today's strike will end this conflict. Maybe Iran will not retaliate. But a new normal has been created. One where Israel and Iran can strike each other. Basically, the shadow war is not shadow anymore. It's out in the open, and that spells chaos for all of West Asia. I know the situation looks hopeless, but on the upside, the world has seen far worse, so this too shall pass. The only question is how. What will it take to restore peace in West Asia? How can the region return to normal? There is no silver bullet to fix this conflict, but a few steps will help. The first and most pressing one is this: a ceasefire in Gaza. The fighting has been going on for more than 6 months. It has killed more than 30,000 Palestinians, and that is the root problem here. Israel has set itself a very ambitious goal in Gaza to eliminate the Hamas. But experts say that could be impossible. Just consider the current situation. Israel spent months fighting in the streets of northern Gaza, but then they moved south, which gave Hamas time to reorganize. Reports say they are re-establishing themselves in the north. Plus, Israel's army could be overstretched. They have spent 6 months in urban war zones, and now they face threats from Iran and Hezbollah, so Israel needs to take a call. Do they go ahead with the invasion of Rafah? Do they refocus on the north? Or do they pursue a ceasefire? Because one thing is clear, the current strategy is not working. Israel is nowhere near getting the hostages back. Dozens of them are presumed dead. So a ceasefire is the need of the hour. It would reduce the pressure on Israel's government. It would also put the focus back on Arab-Israel normalization. Which brings us to step 2, more communication and shuttle diplomacy. And this is very important during conflicts. If communication is not clear, there will be miscalculations, and miscalculations lead to more conflict. I'll give you 2 examples from this standoff. First, before Israel's strike on Iran's consulate in Syria, reports say they told no one about it, not even the Americans. Only moments before the attack did they alert Washington, that too not to discuss but to inform that they're going to strike. And now officials are regretting it. They say the attack was a miscalculation. The second example is before Iran's response. Tehran says they informed the US about the impending attack, and look what happened. 99% of the drones were shot down. So communication and calculation is key. Sometimes they avert conflict. Sometimes they can minimize the impact. But Netanyahu does not seem interested. So far, he's ignored his allies and partners at all stages, whether it's the Gaza war, or the war in Lebanon, or now in Iran. Which brings us to the third step. A possible rejig in Israel. Netanyahu's popularity is nearing rock bottom. Around 76% Israelis want him to resign, and you can see why. He has no plan to get the hostages back. He has started a seemingly endless war in Gaza. He has triggered a conflict with Iran, and he has alienated his Western allies. So perhaps Netanyahu has to go. Perhaps a new leadership can give Israel a fresh start. Someone who can heal the country, someone who can reassure Israel's allies. Which brings us to step 4. American policy must change. Right now, it's rooted in hypocrisy. The Americans give military aid worth billions to Israel. Israel uses that to flatten Gaza. Then the same America offers humanitarian aid to Gaza. How does this policy make sense? And finally, step number 5, probably the most important step of them all. A two-state solution. Palestine must become a sovereign country because it would trigger a chain reaction. Saudi Arabia would likely recognize Israel. Armed Palestinian groups would lose their rallying call. And a strong Arab-Israel alliance could emerge. One that would surely deter Iran. I know it's a long shot right now, but it's also a sure shot. And some of these steps cannot wait because the events of this week have created a new equation in West Asia. Iran says it could review its nuclear doctrine. Publicly, Tehran has ruled out making a bomb, a nuclear bomb, but a review could change that. The regime could actively pursue a bomb. Same with Gaza. An offensive in Rafah would be deeply traumatic. It would force Arab states to abandon Israel completely. So time is of the essence. Israel needs to think beyond ego and narrow political gains. It needs to think about its future. Does it want to be surrounded by enemies and rivals forever, or does it want to live in peace? So tensions are rising. It's a worry for countries around the world, but more so in West Asia. Many of them are caught in a bind. They cannot support Israel, they cannot support Iran, but they also want peace. Tonight, we're looking at where each of these players stands, starting with Qatar. Most Hamas leaders live in Qatar, in the capital Doha. They get a lot of money from the government. So Qatar plays the role of mediator. They negotiate between Israel and Hamas. And in November, they had some success. Both sides agreed to a brief pause in the fighting. Hamas also released some hostages. But a permanent ceasefire has not been achieved, and now Qatar may have had enough. They say their mediation is being abused, so they will re-evaluate their role in the peace talks.
Unfortunately, we have seen that there has been an abuse of this mediation and an abuse of this mediation in favor of narrow political interests. This means that the state of Qatar has called for a comprehensive evaluation of this role.
Who is Qatar talking about? Could be Israel or the US. Benjamin Netanyahu has accused Qatar of funding terrorism. He also threatened to shutter their state-funded news channel Al Jazeera. Even in the US, there have been rumblings. Some in the Congress say Qatar is not tough on Hamas. They're not putting enough pressure. So it looks like Doha has had enough. They will re-evaluate their role in the talks. But if Doha walks away, who is left? Egypt is still at the table. They have normal diplomatic relations with Israel, but they do not have much influence over Hamas, not like Qatar does. Then you have Turkey. The Turkish foreign minister visited Doha on Wednesday. He held talks with the Hamas leadership, and this Saturday, the Hamas chief will be traveling to Turkey. He's slated to meet President Erdogan. So Ankara does have clout. It can put some pressure on Hamas. Just one problem though. Erdogan may not use that clout. He's calling the Israeli Prime Minister bloodthirsty. That's not the language of a negotiator.
The number one party responsible for the tension is Netanyahu and his bloodthirsty administration. We believe that any statement that does not recognize this truth will be of no use to efforts to reduce the tension.
So who's left? Jordan is one candidate. They have normal relations with Israel. They also have a large Palestinian population, but their government is under pressure. And why is that? Because Jordan indirectly helped Israel. A number of Iranian drones and missiles had flown over Jordanian airspace, so their military shot them down. Jordan shot down Iranian drones heading for Israel. The government says it was self-defense, but the people are not buying it. There are massive anti-government protests. The people say Jordan is betraying the Muslims of Gaza, so the government is under pressure there. They cannot afford to be seen as pro-Israel. Which brings us to the Gulf states. Two of them recognize Israel, Bahrain and the UAE. Bahrain's king is on a regional tour. He's visited Egypt and Jordan. He's called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
We have discussed a number of issues of priority and importance to reinforce the joint Arab work, especially with regards to the implementation of the ceasefire resolution in Gaza and humanitarian aid delivery.
Bahrain is a key ally of Saudi Arabia. They do very little without Riyadh support. So is the kingdom looking to play a more prominent role? There are no indications yet. Riyadh's main focus is de-escalation to make sure that Israel and Iran do not go to war. We saw that last weekend. Reports say the Saudis shared intelligence on Iran's attack. Basically, they helped Israel against Iran. But reports also say that they shut their airspace to Israel and the US. And this is very important. Israel and the US could have used the Saudi airspace to intercept Iranian drones. But Riyadh said no. Apparently, the UAE did the same. Yes to intelligence sharing, no to opening the airspace. So the message from the Gulf is clear. We will help avoid escalation, but we have our own red lines. And you can see why. Iran's proxies are camping in Yemen, just south of Saudi Arabia. They've already attacked Saudi refineries, so Riyadh does not want to repeat. And honestly, it makes sense. Saudi Arabia and Iran normalized relations only last year. Why would they risk that for Israel? And that's, in fact, the thinking across West Asia. All of them want stability, all of them want de-escalation, but not at the cost of being pro-Israel. And Netanyahu must realize this. Muslim nations may recognize Israel as a geopolitical reality, as a fact of life in West Asia. But they will never embrace Israel, not unless there is a Palestinian state. So Netanyahu must not overplay his hand. He must remember why Muslim nations are doing what they are. Qatar is not mediating out of love for Israel. Jordan is not shooting down drones out of goodwill. And Saudi Arabia is not sharing intelligence to protect Israel. They're doing it for regional stability, to protect their own people and economies from war. Israel would do well to understand that. So right now things could go either way, and this has West Asia on edge. Remember, we're talking about one of the most militarized regions in the world, not just because of what the regional players have, but also because what global powers have deployed. There's a large number of troops and military assets, from guns to long-range missiles, warships and combat aircraft. And these are all active assets. For example, when Iran fired drones and missiles, 3 Western nations swung into action to defend Israel. The United States, the United Kingdom and France. These are all permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and all with significant forces in the region. Of course, the US has the biggest presence. Before the current tensions exploded, American forces were present in at least 10 West Asian countries. The US was present in 10 countries at least. Out of these, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar and the UAE host the biggest American military bases and the largest contingent of US troops. According to some estimates, the US has more than 45,000 troops and more than 20 bases in the region. The exact numbers have not been disclosed. America never does that. But even by the most conservative estimates, the US presence is quite significant. Which brings us to the UK. They have around 2,500 troops and 23 military bases in the region. The Brits are present in countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Jordan. What about France? France has been a key player in the region for many decades. As of 2022, there were about 2,000 French soldiers in the region. Now, if you add all of this, you get some 50,000 soldiers. The US, the UK and France alone have at least 50,000 troops in West Asia, and they sent even more when Iran threatened to attack Israel. Those additional deployments are yet to be recalled, and the US has confirmed this.
He pre-positioned forces, even in the last few days, destroyers and fighter squadrons into the region to help Israel defend itself, to keep it from becoming a wider war, to keep it from escalating further.
It's not clear when the West will withdraw these troops, and they may say that this is for deterrence, but it's a double-edged sword, really. A provocation can lead to a major clash, given all the presence here, because their rivals, too, have military presence in the region. The biggest among them is, of course, Russia. Russia has around 6,000 troops in Syria. The Russian military is also said to be active in Libya. And this is what makes it a tinderbox, this concentration of firepower in one region. It's staggering. Plus, you have the regional players like Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Iraq. And these deployments are not limited to land. The high seas are also being militarized, especially in the wake of the Gaza war. Every significant geopolitical player has a warship in the region now. The United States has 19 warships, 7 in the eastern Mediterranean and another 12 spread out across 3 areas, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea. The Red Sea in particular is crowded. Last year, when the Houthis began attacking ships, navies from around the world rushed to the region. This includes Russia, China, European nations like Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Greece and Belgium, and even Asian players like India and Sri Lanka. Until a few weeks back, India had some 10 warships deployed here. Now, all these countries are trying to protect their consignments from attacks, especially the oil supplies from West Asia. That's what they're trying to protect. So there's a substantial naval presence here and a lot of volatility, with at least 45 armed conflicts on as we speak. This is what makes West Asia a potentially explosive region. The last thing they want is a war between Israel and Iran. As they say, fighting fire with fire will only leave you with ashes. Now let's look at the worst case scenario, because that's what you do in situations like this. Look at all possibilities, hoping it doesn't come to the worst. What would a full-blown war between Iran and Israel look like? How do they compare militarily? Their capabilities are very different. Israel is one of West Asia's most powerful militaries, and Iran is one of the largest. Whose force is superior? What kind of firepower do they have? And who has a better shot at winning? Our next report tells you.
The drumbeats of war are sounding in West Asia yet again. Israel and Iran are in the middle of an escalating crisis. At the heart of it lies a crucial question. If the worst-case scenario were to unfold, who will come out on top? Israel versus Iran, whose military might has the upper hand. On the surface, the numbers favor Iran. Iran has a huge population, at least in comparison to Israel. Iran is home to about 89 million people, as compared to Israel's population of about 10 million. So on paper, it's advantage Iran, particularly when it comes to the size of its military. The Iranian armed forces are among the largest in West Asia, with at least 580,000 active-duty personnel and 200,000 trained reserve personnel. How big is Israel's military? It has about 170,000 active personnel and 465,000 reservists. So Iran's active personnel is more than thrice that of Israel's. It also has a larger navy, more tanks and armored vehicles, and greater access to fuel. So far, Iran seems to have the upper hand. But there is a catch. Raw data alone doesn't tell you the whole story. Quantitative factors play a role, yes, but so do qualitative ones, like training and advancement of technology. And the nation that comes out on top here is the one with more money, which is Israel. Iran has a GDP of $413 billion, while Israel's GDP stands at $539 billion. This affects their respective military budgets. Reportedly, Iran's is at $10 billion, whereas Israel has a military budget of $24.4 billion. That's almost 2.5 times higher. But the biggest advantage that Israel has is that its military is backed by the United States. America provides Israel with a $3.8 billion annual military assistance. This has allowed Israel to have more advanced weaponry with superior force readiness, making it one of West Asia's most powerful militaries. Let's see how this plays out on land, water and air. In terms of tank force, like the Zulfikar series and the Karar MPT, Iran builds its own tanks. Usually they are based on outdated designs. Then there are T-72s, T-54s and T-55s, which are Iranian copies and considered inferior to the Israeli defense tanks like the Merkava Mark IV, which is one of the best armored tanks in the game. Now let's look at the Navy. Iran's Navy is larger than Israel's, but not as robust. Israel's Navy has access to American and European suppliers and their advanced missiles and vessels. Now, when it comes to air power, contrary to the numbers trend, Israel's force is larger than Iran's. Its arsenal includes 612 aircraft to Iran's 551. Its primary fighting force consists of at least 66 F-15s, 175 F-16s and 27 F-35 stealth fighters. It's also regarded as one of the best in the world, has about 63 F-4s and 26 F-14s. In comparison, Iran's air arsenal is believed to be aging rapidly. So Israel has superior quality, which is why Iran is using another tactic on the battlefield, deploying weapons in large quantities. Iran has a substantial inventory of ballistic and cruise missiles. They are capable of striking targets about 2,000 kilometers away. This puts Israel well within its range. And during the weekend's attack, Tehran launched dozens of explosive-laden drones. These are Iran's pride. They are unmanned aerial vehicles believed to be Shahids, meaning witness in Farsi. These are long-range drones which have been called the AK-47s of Tehran because they are cheap, mass-produced and deadly. Plus, Iran is not without allies. One of its most important is the Lebanese militia, Hezbollah. According to Israeli intelligence, Hezbollah's arsenal contains more than 70,000 rockets and missiles, including long-range and precision-guided missiles. But then again, conventional forces aren't the only ones that can be used on a battlefield. Israel is believed to possess the ability to launch nuclear strikes from land, air and sea. Israel has never openly confirmed or denied its possession of nuclear weapons. So Iran has the numbers, Israel has the technology. While you can't predict a clear winner, if this conflict escalates any further, there's no doubt over who will be the biggest loser: the already restive region and its millions of people.
But wars need a lot more than fighting spirit. You need money, you need weapons, and if possible, you need allies. Now, Israel has a lot of them. Western powers, they are Israeli allies. They may not join the counterattack on Iran, but they give Israel a lot of money. Who can play that part for Iran? I'm afraid there are very few candidates here. Iran has no friends in the Western world. Its top allies are Russia and China. You also have some marginal players like Syria, Venezuela and North Korea. Beyond that, Iran only has friends, not allies. For example, India and South Africa. They're friends of Iran. But neither country will support Iran militarily. Both have called for de-escalation, which leaves you with Russia and China. Will they come to Iran's rescue? Politically, we have seen positive signals. Beijing and Moscow called for de-escalation at the United Nations, but they also pointed to Iran's first strike.
We have also noticed that, according to Iran, its military action was in response to Israel's aggression against its diplomatic premises, and the matter can be deemed concluded.
Yesterday, you instantly reacted and condemned the actions by Iran. It is regrettable that, unlike the meeting today, you did not propose to convene the Security Council on the 2nd of April, where, upon Russian initiative, an emergency meeting was called upon to discuss the Israeli strike against the consulate premises in Damascus.
So they want peace. At the same time, they also understand why Iran hit back. It was not a first strike. It was a retaliation. But will this political support extend to military affairs? Russia has already helped a great deal. In 2007, Iran bought missiles from Moscow, the S-300 anti-aircraft system. Sanctions ended up delaying that deal, but the delivery was made in 2019. Iran is also eyeing the more advanced S-400 missiles, the same one that India has purchased. So Iran's air defense has a significant Russian contribution, same with fighter jets. Last year, Iran finalized a deal with Russia. They're buying Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets. It could be a game changer for Tehran. Their air force only has a few dozen jets, and some of them predate the revolution. So Russia could help them modernize. And what did Moscow get in return? For starters, an important ally in the energy market, plus a defense supplier. Iran has sold its Shahid drones to Russia. Reports say thousands of them have been deployed in Ukraine. Now, these are basically suicide drones. They don't fire at targets, they simply crash into them. So it's cheap and effective. Russia and Iran also have an ideological enemy in the US. Both are under US sanctions, so they work together to bust them. In 2022, bilateral trade was around $5 billion, but last year Russia and Iran decided to trade in local currencies, so chances are trade will improve. Then you have China. That's the other partner of Iran. It's a very different relationship though. For China, Iran is a top source of oil. Around 10% of their crude imports come from Iran. Beijing is Tehran's biggest customer. Plus, you have a massive investment deal. China and Iran have signed a 25-year cooperation deal. Beijing is promising to invest $400 billion in Iran. Let me repeat that for you, $400 billion. So China is cultivating Iran as its top ally in the region. But will these countries support Iran militarily? Looks unlikely at the moment. Russia is already fighting a war in Ukraine. Will they focus on beating Kiev or defending Iran? It's a no-brainer for Putin. Also, Arab nations are leaning towards Israel. We saw Jordan shoot down Iranian drones. Reports say Saudi Arabia also chipped in. So will China and Russia risk antagonizing the Arab world? China gets around 15% of their oil from Riyadh. And Russia needs the Arabs to regulate oil prices. So don't expect Putin and Xi Jinping to jump in. But we can't rule out indirect support. Just look at China's response to the war in Ukraine. On paper, they're neutral. But they continue to help Russia, whether it's by buying Russian energy or selling military parts to the Russian army. Not weapons, but parts. Maybe they could do the same for Iran. But a bigger role would be diplomatic. China and Russia have already criticized the US for helping Israel. They could rally global opinion around this, make it a West versus the rest issue. That requires a lot of diplomatic investment, something that Iran cannot do, but Russia and China can. They could also shield Iran at the United Nations Security Council, maybe veto anti-Iran resolutions. But beyond that, it's a tough ask. We saw the US and the UK shoot down Iranian drones for Israel. Don't expect Russia or China to do that for Iran. Israel's ally, the United States, is also feeling uneasy. America's Treasury Secretary is worried. Her name is Janet Yellen. She is troubled by the situation in West Asia. She believes a surge in violence could impact the global economy. Listen to this.
From this weekend's attacks to the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, Iran's actions threaten the region's stability and could cause economic spillovers.
Look at the choice of words. Iran's actions threaten the region's stability. What about Israel's airstrike in Syria? Conveniently, Yellen made no mention of it. She paints Iran and its proxies as a problem, but overlooks the Israeli strike that set off the latest tensions. But that's American politics for you. Irrespective of who they blame, they're right when they say that this will have economic spillovers. Economists at the IMF are also nervous. That's the International Monetary Fund, IMF. They're concerned about the fluctuation in oil prices.
What has been happening with the tensions in the Middle East is there's been some increase in oil prices, but it's too early to say whether that will be sustained.
In the event of a wider war in West Asia, the conflict's biggest casualty will be the oil supplies from the region. They are crucial, in fact, for the global economy, and the IMF is highlighting the risks here. A shortage of oil may make inflation worse and economies weaker. Countries like South Korea are preparing for the worst-case scenario. Their president, Yoon Suk Yeol, says he wants to mitigate the fallout of a wider conflict.
our country's dependence on crude oil from Middle East is 72%. This will directly lead to significant increases in transport costs and international oil price and will cause even greater pain to the people.
And Seoul is not alone. Countries like India also rely on oil imports. India imports 85% of the oil it uses. Almost half of it comes from West Asia. It travels via the Strait of Hormuz. All major oil importers want this strait to remain open. Let me show you what I'm talking about, which region. The Strait of Hormuz lies between Iran and Oman. It is essential for the world's oil supplies. Over 17 million barrels of oil move through here every day. 17 million barrels every day. That's 1/6 of the world's oil. It travels through this waterway. It's a narrow passage. It looks like an inverted V. Now, the Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. If Israel goes to war with Iran, this route could be compromised. At least 4 major oil producers will be impacted. That's Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE and Kuwait. Most of their oil travels through this strait. And these 4 countries are also among the world's biggest suppliers. If they are unable to access the Strait of Hormuz, if their exports are restricted, there would be chaos in the oil market. The world's energy supply could be choked.
The one that we describe in detail in our report is one where you would have fairly significant disruptions in oil markets that would lead to a 15% increase in oil prices and also increase in shipping costs.
So that would be the first fallout. The second fallout will be seen in the global stock market. What do most investors dread? Uncertainty. They're always looking to avoid sudden shocks, events which could shrink their portfolios. So conflict could trigger a sell-off in the global stock markets, with investors pulling their money and picking safer options. In fact, this could already be happening. In the past week, investors have sold over $15 billion worth of American stocks. These were shares of the biggest US companies, commonly known as large cap stocks. A West Asian conflict could make global markets more volatile, so those are the 2 big risks: depleted oil supplies and disruption in the stock markets. And the Indian economy is vulnerable on both these fronts. A disruption in the global oil market would mean a disruption in Indian supplies and a jump in prices. What about the stock markets? A conflict could impact key industries like automobiles, transport, aviation, paints, tires, cement, chemicals. All these sectors could take a hit. Since 2020, our world has endured 3 big shocks: the Wuhan virus pandemic and 2 major wars, Ukraine and Gaza. The last thing we need is another setback. But if Israel refuses to reverse course, it may be inevitable.